There's been a lot of discussion over the last 2 days about the imperative of standards and the imperative of interoperability. But what's the pathway forward? I feel like I've had a million conversations about this with you all over the past few years, and this conversation seems awfully stuck. So let's try to unstick it. Phil Gilmore is the COO of US Rail Systems. He's been leading our standards committee that we've had over the past 6 months. Phil is going to give a presentation about the European experience and what do we do about it. Go ahead. Come on up, guys.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sticking around. I'll make this quick. There's been a lot of talk over the last few days about thinking big and a lot of talk about a network. Well, to create a network, we need to fix interoperability. But interoperability is also causing us issues right now with the projects that are ongoing. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about interoperability, and then the panel is going to go on to talk about the benefits. So quickly, what is interoperability? So interoperability is the ability for a train to travel on any stretch of track without limitation. The without limitation bit is important. So that train should be able to go the maximum speed for that alignment. And it's not a new idea. We've talked a lot about Europe over the last few days and how that is a good window into what the US can be. Well, Europe has suffered a lot of interoperability issues. So almost 200 years of development in isolation. So each nation developed their own railroad to fix the problems for their people, which was fine. As distances increased, speeds increased, it became a problem to cross those national borders. So what did they do? 1996 gave birth to the TSIs, which are the technical specifications for interoperability. So that was the start of fixing interoperability issues, and they're still fixing them today. There's still pain points with trains being able to travel across Europe. So Jean-Baptiste yesterday from Italo talked about the cost of a train. I don't know if you heard, he said, a train that stays in Italy is around 100 million euros, and a train that goes around Europe is around 200 million euros. So you can see that cost. They're still suffering those issues now. And then Francois from Aegis. So a train that goes all the way around Europe needs 7 different signalling systems. And those were almost unavoidable for Europe. It happened over a 200-year stretch. They're not unavoidable for us. We can fix those problems right now. And it's cost Europe a lot of money. So it's difficult to pin down how much interoperability issues have cost. But, in the last budget, $22.6 billion, a large amount of that was still to fix interoperability issues, around $7 billion to create the CENTI network. So some key technical considerations. I'm not going to go too deep into this. You've got to get your tracking infrastructure right. You've got to get aligned on tracking infrastructure. So if we have 2 different projects that are using a different rail profile, it's very difficult for trains to then operate on each other's network without costly modifications in the future. Signaling and comms, as I already said, 7 different signaling systems on a train. It becomes costly. It drives the complexity of projects up. That drives the schedule and further drives cost. And then rolling stock. So you think about maximum gradients. We heard yesterday from the Stacey Whitbeck guys about a 5% maximum gradient. Well, those trains cost more, but then also trains that might come off from an alignment that has a 3% maximum gradient can't get up those grades. So you can't interoperate. Where is the US on this? So I hate to say it, but there is no agreed approach to interoperability. As we say here today, we don't have a common understanding of how to build interoperable railroads in the US. And we are heading towards a European-style fragmented network. That's just a fact. And that will lead to costly rework and costly modifications down the line. It also leads to reduced ridership. Passengers have to change trains more, which they don't want to do. And that will reduce your ridership. It reduces revenue. What can we do? We can do nothing. So we can accept that in the future we will have to rework some project, we'll have costly modifications. And that is an approach. That is an acceptable approach if that's what as an industry as we decide. We can come together as an industry and try and, lead from the bottom up and get the biggest projects together to create these standards for interoperability. And we can lead the government in adopting those by collaboration by the biggest projects. Or as Europe did, we can wait for regulatory intervention, or we can lobby for regulatory intervention, and we can ask the FRA or other governing bodies to produce these interoperability standards and ensure that, we're all on the same path. I'm just going to leave you with before we go, the opportunity is now. We've started some projects, but we've not started, in anger, the systems elements. The opportunity is now to come to an agreement where we can solve interoperability issues and give passengers the network that, we know we can achieve and that we've been promising for the last 10, 15 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Let me turn on this clock so we know how much time we have. Thank you. So we're here with Henry Rusnow, who we met his dad and colleague earlier. Henry's, you're the director of transit products with Mac Products. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And Tim, I don't have your title. Tim,
Yes. Director of Business Development for Lone Star Railroad Contractors, and we are a GCF group company.
And you guys already met Andrea many times. So, you guys are interoperability purists, one might say. This is something that that you feel needs to happen. But, we're stuck in this early stage of developing this industry where we're just desperate to get anything done, anything built to reach that tipping point we're constantly talking about. And why can't we just kick the can down the road? We can deal with this stuff later. How is this affecting us today is what I'm trying to get at. Why do we need to deal with this right now instead of just waiting?
I'll try to get us. I think just if we just kick the can down the road, as you say, then we're going to be in the same situation as Europe is still in. Costs a lot of extra money. Probably not as will develop as fast as we would like. As Ian was speaking about earlier, that we really need to make these projects happen and make them happen quickly so that people, really believe that it's going to happen. So I think if we drop the ball from one project to the next, as far as standards, specifications, similar, they don't have to be the same, but they need to be very, very close. So having a standard would certainly help the process.
Yeah.
So Henry.
Yeah, no, I think that no one here is trying to reinvent the wheel. I think that you've heard that a lot over the last couple of days. Don't reinvent the wheel. I think that it's more of an industry-wide confusion, so to speak, and more of an alignment. You have a lot of new market entrants coming in. We really, as an industry, invite a lot of our different companies to become, partners in this market. What you're seeing, though, are a lot of delays and a lot of confusion. Even sometimes you see as we are involved in different projects, you speak with one person who's involved with the project and they'll tell you one thing. You speak with another person involved with the project from another company and they tell you something else. So it feels like as an industry need to be on the same page here in order to also speed up everything that's going on here. And that's obviously a big issue that we're also focusing on here.
And just to add to that, I think at the minute we are reinventing the wheel. So every project that starts up starts from the ground and starts to build their own technical standards, which is the right thing to do. But having the TSIs, if we use them as an example, they're a minimum. So they're sort of a minimum agreement on what a system should look like. It gives you a basis to quickly build from. You're not starting from scratch and understanding, what do we do from the ground up? You've got some basis to build your project from. And then I think there's this perception that, agreeing some interoperability standards across networks is going to slow these current projects down, or it's going to cost these current projects more money. And I just don't see that as the case. I think there's a way to do it. Most of these projects are already aligned on 90% of what we're doing. So there is a way to do it without stalling anything. But at the end of the day, keeping the passenger in mind, they benefit from this in 10, 15, 100 years because we've solved the problem now and we're not doing what Europe did and trying to re-engineer and backward engineer everything to solve the problem afterwards.
Yeah, if I go ahead, Andrea. Giambattista gave some numbers yesterday. The fact that costs more the train. The train costs 25 million euro, and they told it's the double the cost. We have some example right now about Frecciarossa. Frecciarossa is the train from ATR 1000 that is used in Italy and France. A train for Italy costs 28.8 million euro. The same train that goes in France is 35 million euro. Another example is if you are starting from Milan, going my city, you go to Switzerland, is 50 kilometers, so really, really close. And if you have a high-speed train that is maybe 250 kilometers per hour, because the line is the maximum speed in some parts is something like that. You have, for example, three systems of a catenary. One is 3 kV, another is 25 kV, another for Switzerland then is 16.6 kV. So that's kind of, because why? Because the system in Italy and Europe was born as a different system. Right now we are investing so much with the 10T project and so on to make it possible this interoperability within a system and another. When it's possible in many cases, but you have to pay more as a train. But it's needed to avoid, this is my perception, in Europe right now we are trying to come back to the mistake. It's not a mistake, it's history. So the system was done completely differently. So we are going to create something together, but we are investing billions and billions of dollars just to arrive to some result. And was created the ERA, the European Railway Agency, that right now is the European Union Railway Agency, that is helping to go in this direction, to have a single process of homologation and so on. But it's very complex. So what we saw in Europe, that right now we are following, or we are running to try to make an interoperable system that was not there because the history.
But in areas like securing materials or developing the workforce, how is the lack of standards, how is it affecting those areas right now?
Yeah, I think it goes back to kind of what I was speaking about before. And you have a lot of these new projects that are taking a very long time. We want to procure materials. We want to get, rails on the ground. You're not going to see that type of foreign investment, especially with Buy America standards, when there is changes for every single project, right? And with a workforce that we're trying to develop here as well, it's already a hurdle right now to start to really train people to do high-speed installation, right? So how is someone who has the expertise in Europe or Asia going to invest money not only to come over here, but train people in, let's call it Las Vegas, but then have to go get new people in Northern California and train them on a completely different product? And it's not really just a product, because this isn't what the common mistake that we're seeing right now is. This isn't specifying in a company into a line, but it's general guidelines. So if something's completely different and the system's going to be built completely differently, then, you're going to run into those delays again, and it's going to, in turn, cost a lot more money.
Yeah, just well, and then,
Then Phil.
sorry.
Yeah.
Delays is, important as well, but you also, the material, if there's such significant changes to the material, the cost goes up. So every time about manufacturers, you order a frog from him, say, and so, but you get totally different specs than what they have. Now they've got to redesign, which costs money, and then product's going to cost you more money when you procure it.
Just to add to that, sorry to all the track engineers, but you take a relatively simple product like rail, and I can say that because I'm a traction power engineer. If you develop high-speed systems with a different profile of rail, and how do we set up a mill to roll one profile for a limited order? Surely standardizing that across the nation opens the market up to several mills. They know exactly what rail they want to roll. That drives the cost down. It drives your supply chain up so we can build quicker. That's the issues that are happening now. They're not down the road. They're constraining our industry now.
Yeah. So let's move forward to the pathway out of this mess. I got to talk about the elephant in the room here, which is we got the Japanese technology advancing haltingly in Texas, and we got the European technology out on the West Coast. Do we just have to wait 15 years to see which one emerges and which one's better and just live with all of these issues? Or can we figure out a way to get through this without killing off one of it? I don't think they're going to kill off what's going on out west, as we heard today. But do we have to kill off the Japanese technology, which we're not endorsing, let's be clear, in order to get standards?
Well, I think one of the issues with the Japanese is it's totally different than AAR as far as the turnouts are concerned. So if you run an AAR car through a turnout, you're going to derail on the Japanese turnout. So it's some differences there that quite possibly we can't overcome as far as rolling stock.
Yeah, and just to add to that, to think that we're going to end up with a high-speed rail system with zero passenger changes at stations is not what we're talking about. Texas is big enough to have its own system, and most people would fly into Texas and use the system to get around Texas. You might then have a change at Dallas where a more European style system comes into it, but that doesn't negate the fact that the European style projects that are being built now should have an agreed way of it being interoperable. And you might end up with two interoperability standards, one for more Japanese technology and one for European technology, depending on how much Japanese technology ends up getting built. If there's more than one Japanese network. But the fact that we have different system types, occurring at the minute doesn't mean that we should ignore networks that have a very possibility of being connected. They are regionally located. They are close to each other. So, we should be, working to interoperate.
Andrea, what would you recommend we do about this? $1 million question.
First of all, I can tell about the Japanese, for example. Frecciarossa 1000. I will not mention the brand and the company, but is a Japanese company that right now is owner of Frecciarossa 1000 in Italy. They're producing in Italy because it's coming from Italian technology and so on. So in Italy, for example, we have a French producer, a Japanese producer for train that is running in Italy. Then, of course, there's all the synchronization elements that is very, very important and so on. But it's something that it is normal to have something like that in Europe. You have producer in Spain, you have producer in France, in Germany, and so on. So, of course, from my perspective, coming from Europe and working a lot with ERA, with the European Railway Agency, I know what is the effort that is trying to do to harmonize all the system. It's not easy. It's not easy because there's a lot of investment. I think also about in Spain, just for the signalization, there's some problem for the new entrants that they have no possibility to use the line going to Sevilla, for example, because it was the old system of signalization, and the French operator can't enter immediately on that line. So you have also this kind of problem now in Europe, and it's not so easy to obtain maybe that signaling system also to operate in other line and so on. So what I try to suggest is to try to avoid what we did in Europe. That I repeat is not made something like that because it was they want to make something different, but also because they started different system. You know, in Italy, the first stretch of high-speed line was built in 1977. And 1981, we have the Parillon in France, and then the other countries. So it was really quite 50 years that they are building the system with different technology. And right now we are trying to put all together to create a real single European railway area. But of course, it's cost a lot and it's very complex.
But from a political perspective, I love the idea of having two different sets of standards. That's the first time I've heard that. It's a very elegant solution to this challenge. Does that work in practice? Is that going to
different standard?
Having a Japanese standard and a European standard?
No, in Italy we continue to in terms.
I mean, no one suggested that for us, is what I'm saying.
So what I was going at was
Separate.
if you've got a Japanese system that gets built in Texas, and then they start to add more Japanese networks onto that, you need interoperability standards potentially, depending on if the technology is slightly different to connect those systems. You would get a European train going into that system, and they would have to do a cross-platform transfer to get onto the Asian system. It's not a failure to end up with those two, but it is a failure to end up with 50 different system types.
I think we can all agree with that. Hopefully everyone can agree. You were going to say something?
Yeah, before we were going back to this, I think that these European standards I think that's something that I think we all recognize here, and someone spoke about it earlier about different IEEE standards and ARENA standards that have made it very successful for us and most people here who have been in this industry in the US. We don't have that type of governing body at this point, obviously, and someone who can really push forward, not just high-speed rail standards, something that, it's just because it wasn't always here. And obviously being in a room with people like ourselves right here is the Kickstarter and hopefully something that really propels that. But I do think it's super interesting. Like, look, you go to Intertrans, the European agency has their own booth. IC has their own booth. You can go up to them. You could talk to them. They're passionate about it. Not to say that that's not the case here with anyone, but for high-speed rail, we don't have that. So we are really our own champions here, and having for us to lobby essentially to other people, and we have some people, but to establish something like that to really get a full force.
So we've got a few minutes left. Does anybody have any questions or comments about this? Wow. Okay. All right. So let's do over here first, and then we had two over here.
Thank you. Right, first with T1, two-part question. The first one is, many of these technology train control systems and comm systems are proprietary to the rolling stock company, and they're tightly guarded in some of the situation. I'm interested to hear how you integrate other systems into their trains, or how they allow their systems to be in somebody else's train to go through through a European trip, the way you mentioned earlier. Sure. The second part is, I wonder if you've had situation where there were physical constraints caused by some vehicles are wider but not as high, some of them are higher, you've got clearance issues to some bridges. Just want to hear if you've had situations such as that.
So I'm not an engineer, I'm a transport economist, but from my experience speaking with data, and the experience from different companies, take in mind the Milan, Paris, line that is partially high-speed line. Right now, the Frecciarossa Mille, they have a different signalization system on board. So also for this reason, costs more the train because they have to have a different system on board. And to have homologation of new trains, maybe from Renfe to go to Paris right now is also prone to find all the elements to obtain the homologation to go to Paris directly from Barcelona. Right now they are going to Marseille, they are going to Lyon. So it's possible to do, but it costs more, as Giambattista told me yesterday.
And I can answer the one on, spatial requirements and gauge. So yes, you do have those problems. A simple one that with the European interoperability specifications is platforms. So agreeing a platform height, really simple. But if we don't agree a standard platform height, it simply means that people can't get on and off the train safely because they're all different heights. So how does a train deal with that? Platform offset from track centre line. You end up with trains that simply can't fit in a station, or when it goes up to the station, the gap is 2 feet to the platform. So those are the minimums that we're suggesting should be talked about and agreed. So yeah, gauge is definitely something we need to think about.
Okay, I think we had Andrew and then Elaine.
Thank you. So in the vacuum of high-speed rail standards for the US and Andrew Mitchell, Network Rail Consulting. In that vacuum, and just thinking about the development of how you get to those standards, one of the forerunners usually is by generating codes of practice. And so when you think about high-speed rail, and then across the states in America is providing codes of practice that allow the states to try and align when they're thinking about high-speed rail. So just coming back to your point, Phil, that says the code of practice says that your high-speed rail platform should be, right? It's not specifying that it's an absolute standard, but it gets adopted as you move through the development. This is 50 to 75 years. We're in a long-term game. So I think some of the ways we can address that is by saying, okay, here's the code of practice for high-speed rail in America that looks at rail profile. This gives you best bang for your buck. And just moving it across and then through those suppliers, what do the panel think about adopting that as a methodology?
Codes of practice?
I can say that. So I lead the standards committee on behalf of Ezra and Amber, and that is something we're trying to do. We try to work with Arena, and we try to work with as many of you guys as we can. So all I would say is the more people that join that standards group, we meet every Monday at the minute. We might go to less than that. But the more people that come on that group and give an industry consensus, because what we want to do is we do want to produce codes of practice. We want to eventually produce some sort of specification that we can follow. But the more people we can get signed up to that and the more names on that, the better. So,
and I would add, I think we need more of a sense of getting over our existential angst about how impossible this is and just deciding we're going to do something. Aline?
Yeah, my question was, obviously along the lines of everybody else's, but just with, I think from a supply chain standpoint of, say, turnouts, because currently, like you're mentioning, Arima, in the US, we don't have high-speed turnouts. Well, someone needs to be manufacturing them. There's obviously going to be a demand for them, and this is a capitalistic society. So is there a US high-speed turnout, and can we get a copy of it, and can we get it out there in places like Arima? I think it's people don't know what their options are, and they're defaulting to Europe, which may not be the best choice for the US. What is the US high-speed turnout? Where do I get a copy of the US high-speed turnout?
Well, I think you should start with the Northeast Corridor. They're the highest speed, they're 125.
They're not high speed. Yeah, no.
Okay, the highest speed, okay, that's all I'm saying. So that would be one place where you could start, I guess. And And then along with that, I mean, we can look at, so the different manufacturers in Europe say, you know, what does their high-speed turnout look like? And, you know, we have companies in the US that, you know, they do engineering all the time. They change turnouts and they do all kinds of stuff. So it shouldn't be a problem for them to come up with a process or a design that's going to work for the high-speed rail.
And again, that's about inviting competition again, as you said. This goes back to the standards. Let's put to the side, what is the standard? If you don't have anything out there, nobody's going to be willing to make that investment, right? If people haven't made it already for, you know, knowing that, you know, a Bright Line's coming or a California high-speed rail is coming, and it's really up in the air because they don't know what that standard is going to be set as, that goes across the board, not just turnouts. That's a great example, right? But how can people make that investment? And right, what's the political landscape right now in America? Bring back manufacturing, have foreign investment. But, you know, for our industry, people are not going to necessarily take those risks if there's really no set, you know, it could be the Wild West right now, going back to where it was yesterday.
And I'm looking for maybe one more question, but Andy and Brian, you guys should get mic'd up for the next panel. Now, any other questions about this? Or thought, comments? Panelists, any concluding thoughts on how we move forward here?
I mean, maybe into politics. So for me, sat here, it's like really seems really simple to solve. But I'm not a politician, so.
Yeah, I think more involvement, just like this, as we said, no one else is going to do it for us as it shows right now. So we need everyone to be on board so that we can have the confidence to go to the emerging agencies and say, you know, we feel that there needs to be something, not necessarily tell, and we can phrase that and frame it. That's why we have people like Ezra, but you know, we have to get together on that.
Yeah, I've heard that. I mean, I think as an industry, that's something that we need to do. We need to get together and say, here, this is going to be best for all of us in the industry. And, you know, from constructability standpoint to material procurement, training, I mean, everything kind of goes together. So I think all of us need to work together on that end.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with this point. But you know, I come from completely different experience. I don't know US very well, as you know, but I have experience in Europe that it was very hard to make later, to take the decision later. So it's I don't want to tell that you have to avoid. You have to decide for this standard, not this standard. It's not up to me. I'm not engineer, but at the same time, is when the right moment to take decision because you are still at the beginning of the era of high-speed rail.
So the longer we wait, the harder it gets. Sounds like. Thank you guys very much.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.